We welcome you back to the second half of this first class on the Kaivalya Upanishad. And I meant to say that I think I mentioned 3 classes, 3 Sundays in a row, and it seems like I must correct myself and say there might be 4 classes over the next 4 Sundays, including today. So that probably is how many classes I originally allowed myself to get through an Upanishad, even though this one's only about 25 slokas long. So make that correction and settle yourself in for a month of Kaivalya teachings. And we had a good amount of them in the first hour and a half. And I introduced it through methods like dissolving the mind stream and seeing through the 5 sheaths, or Adara system it's called in Vedanta, where you see that the Atman has taken on these coverings. Of course, consciously would be one thing, and unconsciously would be another. That is, forgetting the Atman and thinking yourself to be the sheaths. It would never present Kaivalya would never present itself to such souls. So we also looked at the classic way of Kaivalya, because we heard it mentioned early on by Lord Kapila in Sankhya Yoga, one of the most ancient darshanas of India, that preceded the yoga and Vedanta and a lot of these systems, historically speaking. And so all of that was just to demonstrate that this separation from matter and spirit is necessary, and we came necessary for realization of the true nature of the self. So we came then to this new chart that I fashioned last night, and we showed the general outlay of it with Prakriti being down below, the soul meditating on its own, the Purusha, the soul with a capital S, we like to say, and the Mahat right there, available to it. So it's really facing, or maybe even has behind it, the Mahat, and then it's looking out on Prakriti and saying, I took this on, how am I going to give it up? Or, I assumed this, now I must give it up. Or, I want to give it up. In the case of some souls, it's time. And that's called attachment and detachment. There's many types of attachment with desires at the foundation of them, but detachment happens in 12 levels in Vedanta. So I could show you a chart on that, but it just suffice to say that it happens in a mridu kind of way to some people. They detach meekly. Like, say, an example of that would be losing a loved one, like a spouse, and for a year you never want to marry again, but then all of a sudden you're back to wanting, you meet someone, and that's called very, very mild detachment. In a sense, you didn't learn your lesson that things pass. So maybe it's not such a understood by Westerners would say, well, yes, you should go find another partner, as soon as you get over your grieving period. So that's, supposed to be the proper way of doing things. People like to see that. But it would be nice if you learned your lesson first about things passing and then find another partner. At least let's say that in favor of the Vedanta, Buddhism, yoga, and other Indian darshanas, so that detachment can go to a level of middling from mild. And those stages of detachment are stronger. You do learn about the changing Maya, the passing appearances of things. Other words, Prakriti. Also, sometimes Maya and Prakriti are synonymous terms in the Indian teachings. The Maya seems to have a more kind of cosmic here-there, delusion kind of side to it, and Prakriti has a more, well, that's real when it happens, it's not real when it doesn't happen. It's got substance to it. So there are some different shades of meaning to the 2 words, but basically they almost use them interchangeably. So, and you can see that as you study the scriptures more, the Shruti, and hear the non-dual truth, because beyond both Maya and Prakriti is the real point of it. It's this non-dual truth, or what Advaita Vedanta proposes. And I do have a chart I might bring for that, what Advaita Vedanta thinks of as separating the wheat from the chaff. It's sort of like from their standpoint, it's already a feat that's already accomplished, even before you get into the body. So it's all coming from a precognitive knowing, if you want to use that term. And in the case of illumined souls who have shed their karmas, and as beings like Ashvalyayana and Ribhu in the Untitled Upanishad have done, when they went to their fathers, whom they saw as great exemplars, it would be different if in the West in these days and times we hadn't been raised with dharmic parents or even had an illumined soul in our family. In India still sees that happening. We know in the case of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Vivekananda, that he was the illumined soul of his father and mother, and Sri Ramakrishna of his, and Holy Mother of her family. But there weren't very many beings in their family who could understand the level, their level of consciousness and their teachings. But still, nevertheless, they were devotees. So anyway, this way of coming and approaching this great word and this great principle, this very, you might say, highest tattva, if you want to put it in that terms, of Kaivalya, is why a whole Upanishad got written about it, because it is, if not liberation itself being used here, it is a penultimate stage to liberation. And I have a chart to show you about that real soon here. But let's find out where we've been. Ashvalyayana approached Lord Brahma and said, "Teach me the knowledge of Brahman, the highest, always cultivated by the best of beings, hidden, and by which the wise one drives away instantly all transgressions and reaches to Purusha, higher than the high." Higher than the high. So it's, Mahat may be high, but beyond that is this Purusha which you always are. To him the grandsire said, that's Lord Brahma, "Know it by means of faith, devotion, and meditation." He kind of ran through that, past that, to get to the point. But those would be yogas. Yoga of faith, you might say bhakti, but it's also there in other yogas. Devotion would be bhakti. Meditation would be the Raja Yoga. And of course the Jnana Yoga is through and through this. But not by work, nor by progeny, nor by wealth do they attain Kaivalya, but by renunciation. And he expands on that. Higher than heaven, seated in the cave of the heart, the buddhi that shines is that which the self-controlled attain. The self-controlled who, being of pure minds, have well ascertained the reality of Brahman by the knowledge of the Vedanta and through sannyas or renunciation. In the sphere of Brahma, at the time of cosmic dissolution, they all get liberated from the highest apparent immortality of the manifested universe. So that says in very esoteric language that the realm of Lord Brahma is also not Brahman. It's the Mahat. And you would go beyond that highest station by meditating on the Mahat. The Mahat, if you're calling it Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, then the avatars come out of that trinity. And so we meditate upon them. They take bodies, and they're our highest ideals. And through them we get to the Father through the Son, or to the Mother through the daughters, or to the Mother through the daughters, we say in Divine Mother reality. So that's a little more esoteric information that if you didn't stop and consider it, you might say that these beings who are in the sphere of Brahma, they get liberated. No, they don't always get liberated. They stay in the realm of Lord Brahma until they too are through with the worlds of name and form, highest heavens. Beyond all name and form is then this Brahman, and you get to there by Kaivalya, which is separating yourself from all things with name and form in time and space. All things. So there's no vestiges anymore of worlds or lokas or beings or gods or goddesses or any of that. like Sri Ramakrishna having his vision of non-dual reality, and even Mother Kali dissolving, the form of Mother Kali in his third eye, his mind dissolving. So that's the very high singular standard or criterion for getting Kaivalya, why a whole Upanishad is written. And actually we're fortunate here, this particular Upanishad is translated by Swami Madhavananda, so we have a good, reliable Ramakrishna order Swami giving out this, from the Advaita Ashrama in Calcutta, giving us this nice English translation. Then we said there, higher than the heavens, seated in the cave that shines, the self-control attained this, and it's beyond the sphere of Brahma, and cosmic dissolution happens, means that's when Shiva has taken over from Vishnu, who had taken over from Lord Brahma. And this, we were talking about a breath, and we were talking about 24 hours cycles. Well, this cosmic dissolution will happen after a Mahayuga, which is hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. 4 billion might be an estimate of a cosmic cycle where Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are presiding over this huge play that has been projected out of the highest thought, and which will run its course and then end. So that's called pralaya. We don't really have a convenient word for that suggests that everything's going to come back again. It's always one and done with us in the West. A big bang, diffuses, it's all over. You live one lifetime in it, and a bunch of things happen, and it's all nothing in the end. But this is all how consciousness cycles itself, how it gets around in its own projection. The 4 feet of Brahma, it's called Brahmapada. How does Brahman disport itself? I can bring you that chart next week and show you. It does through the 4 states of consciousness, waking, dreaming, deep sleep. So that's Brahman moving through its Shakti via the cosmic mind in beings. And so these are all important steps that you take into consideration when you meditate on something like the Mahat. And let's, for instance here, if we're going to complete this chart and show you what they mean by it's retained by, it's realized by sannyas and renunciation, then we'll take Gaudapada's quote here. Kaivalya is the property of being isolated, of having detached from others. That means that the isolated element, which is Purusha, is distinct from Prakriti and its 3 gunas. That's further explained here with Vachaspati saying, Kaivalya denotes total absence of the 3 types of sorrow. As the Purusha is totally opposite of the 3 gunas, so isolation is natural in the case of the Purusha. So that it took on all of this could have been called unnatural, or a projection, or a superimposition, a dream, and a loss of isolation from it, a participation in it, and then maybe even a bondage to it and a suffering that came from it. All of this has to be seen as a possibility when a cosmic cycle kicks in. So, yo brahmanan vidadati purvam, yo vai vidamsya prahino hitasmai. The Upanishads say that at the beginning of a cosmic cycle, this one nameless, formless Brahman projected the Trinity and gave it the Vedas. And then it acted as an eternal bridge to immortality, like this, you see, for them, for the Trinity. And I go for refuge to that one Brahman. The Rishi of the Upanishad, of that Upanishad, is saying, I make sure I go for refuge to that Brahman, So he's not saying I go to the Trinity or I go to this and that or any tattva. My refuge is always in Brahman. So out of which all of this cosmic projection flowed, and which gets returned or withdrawn again at the end of a cosmic cycle. So the Trinity is sitting on the one non-dual hand of Brahman and doing its process like a tempest in a teacup. Everything is happening there is a dream. It's dreamlike. It doesn't have any effect, which you would know if you went back here and looked at these 5 facts and took them seriously and memorized them and used them as your way of proceeding in non-dual philosophy. I do nothing. Not of myself do I do, that Sri Ramakrishna used to say. So that kind of detachment, I didn't finish that teaching, it goes to an extreme level, parama vairagya. And so from the meek to the middling to the extreme, there are beings that reach this extreme detachment, which then opens this porthole of Kaivalya into Brahman as an experience, as the final experience. So, going on with this quote, absence of the 3 gunas then, atraigunyam, denotes absence of pleasure, pain, and confusion. Sukha, dukkha, moha rahitva is the Sanskrit term in that sloka. Vachaspati says this. Vachaspati. So absence of the 3 gunas denotes absence of pleasure, pain, and confusion. And that's how the 3 gunas are set off against the Purusha. They're the opposite. One is acreate, the other one is create. It's all about projection, sustenance, and withdrawal on this side. The Purusha is all about acreate Brahman. And so if you maintain your identity with your true nature, then this does look like a tempest in a teapot to you. And you have that kind of extreme detachment that even when you're amidst it or in it, you're looking at it from a distance. Which is why we all have those feelings sometimes, that if we get interested in philosophy at all, or truth, or religion even, we all have those feelings like, I've been here before, this is a dream, this isn't real, and so forth. Because it isn't, and it is. And we just not are seeing it with the deep philosophical trappings that the seers know it through, like I'm sharing with you today. It's called Dharma. That pretty much finishes the chart, except for the fact that all of these flowers and leaves have the 5 senses on them. They have the 5 elements. There you see smell, taste, touch, hear, and sight on the left hand. On the right side, you have the leaves there are name, form, time, space, and causality, which are the 5-fold markings of Maya that have all come out of this cosmic mind at a very refined level and trickled down to through the 3 worlds. Subtle. Let's use the English equivalents: deep sleep, dreaming, and waking state. And gotten more solid and denser vibration and turned into objects, then dream objects as you move back in the process, which is not just sleep but also meditation. You can dissolve that, right? We're saying you do that consciously in your meditation, you do it unconsciously when you go from waking to dreaming, deep sleep. And there's a curtain of nescience in there somewhere that causes you to forget that you were in deep sleep and that your ego had died, but you were still there. You get my gist here. This is all going on at so many different levels. A breath, a 24-hour period, all the way up to a Maha Yuga. As if, and even at the physical level, the earth expands, remains, and contracts as the sun heats it at one side of it and not. There's this breath going on that even nature's doing that makes it look sentient, but it isn't. So people get drawn into that. It's called parinama. Oh, change. Look at the different kinds of insects. We found some new ones. Look at the new species of animals. Look at those birds we've never seen before. And this is all the attraction of Maya for the individualized soul to get involved deeper and deeper and deeper in the illusion of change. Now, if they knew that change was illusion, they could do that, and they would be safe. But they forget their true nature. This is the main point to see when you're trying to separate Purusha from Prakriti. It's not about nature's bad, the devil's evil, religion has let me down, philosophy is not true, God doesn't exist. Those kinds of thoughts you can put aside and just find the facts of the matter, and like they have done in the Vedanta, and live by those. And be free at the beginning, middle, and end of it by knowing that there's no middle, beginning, and end at all. Until Kaivalya happens. So that makes Kaivalya, or formlessness, or nirvana, or nirvikalpa samadhi, or sampragata samadhi, or satori, the most important thing. It's really the only thing that is the essence of Kaivalya. That's what Kaivalya is pointing to. You are that, you are that, you are that. And you're not this. But you should know this so that you can know you're that. You'll see that chart next week. In order to know who you are, you have to know what you're not. That was my conclusion drawn decades ago by seeing pseudo-Advaitas just parrot over and over again. Who am I, who am I, who am I? They started sounding like owls. And they had no teachings to back them up in America back there, the 70s. So now we've come, more decades into the process. Vivekananda's teachings have become more pronounced. And we've had our look in America at Zen Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, and Chinese Buddhism. And Vedanta has always been the underground stream that's feeding all of this, the Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual reality. So there's where Kaivalya applies the best. There's where samadhi happens. There's where nirvana of the Buddha pertains. And it's told you by these great scriptures and by these dharmic teachings. It's the one thing you want to hear. Shruti, Shravana, to hear that one thing in your life once, should remind you of your true nature. So Maya on the leaves, senses and elements on the flowers, that's all Prakriti covers, you see. Those are the dissolution of the mind stream elements we just dissolved in a chart a little while ago in the first half. Those are the 24 cosmic principles of Samkhya that we just looked at and said, I'm not that, I'm not that. Those cover the 5 sheaths of Vedanta. Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha. And it begins to get up to this level of the Mahat. And beyond the individual ego to the Buddhi, to the intelligence, which he mentions here. Higher than heaven, seated in the cave, called the Buddhi that shines, the self-control, being of pure minds, use that to ascertain divine reality. It's beautiful. And they do it by the knowledge of Vedanta and through sannyas and renunciation, or renunciation. So, see, sannyas for the monks, renunciation for the dharmic householders. So there's another easier way of dealing with the word renunciation, which is not a happy word for most people in the world, attached to the senses, the elements, attached to Prakriti, and as if it's the only thing. Well, Prakriti has its own reality. Sometimes even the ascetics will give it that. Yeah, it's there as long as you see it. It's just that we doubt whether it's there when we don't see it. But Brahman isn't that way. It's the only thing that exists. It's there all the time. And when you see it, you know it. But when you see nature, it's not going to change. It's not going to escape the change that happens day to day, month to month, age to age. So you can't count on it. You can't build your house on sand. One Swami told me once, If I put $1 million in a bank in a dream tonight and come back tomorrow night, it's probably not going to be there. Probably won't even find the bank or dream it. But if I put $1 billion in the bank here on Earth, it'll probably be there tomorrow if everything goes right in business. So he's talking how in the waking and dreaming state, how mutable things are and how changeable they are. You can't count on them. And people are putting all their eggs in the one basket of physics and matter. And they're building a house on the shifting sands, even though the bedrock is right there. So Vivekananda says, don't give them dirty ditch water to drink. When the river of Dharma, pure in all its purity, is flowing right next to them, right nearby, give them those teachings which help them separate themselves out from the ever-changing Maya and from matter, the atomic particles. We'll look at that next week. So this chart then we can look at. The first quote is from the Jivan Mukti Viveka. What a powerful scripture that is. And it's usually recommended for monks, not for householders. But there are householders here that are suggested that are practicing renunciation too. And they're even detached from their families when they have them because they know these teachings. They're having dharmic families. They're earning dharmic wealth. They're doing dharmic work. See, so doesn't that change the swift and premature conclusion anyone might have if they hear, not by wealth or by family or for work can it be attained. But if you put the word dharmic in front of those three, then you've got people who are living in a state of renunciation who aren't monks. And the rishis were like that. They weren't all of them monks. They were family men and women. We read the Annapurna Upanishad here. That mantra is used by an infinite amount of female ascetics, the Annapurna Upanishad says. And meditating on her, we used her 27 syllable mantra that is used to get free by female ascetics. See, so you've got these great souls, whether they're monk or householder, that are on that trajectory or on that side of the Dharma or the Atmagyan that automatically qualifies them to know in any given lifetime that they're not matter. Why is it that most people don't know that, but a few do? That's a question you might want to ask. So how the Jivan Mukti Viveka is putting here, if you want to renounce in 4 easy phases, renounce first the desire for enjoyment, then the inner mental desires that foster it. Keep the pure desires, such as desire for friendship. Then practice giving even that up inwardly and seek knowledge alone. Finally, giving up even the desire for knowledge, abide in what remains and give up that by which you renounce. That sounds like Ashtavakra Samhita, Avatuta Gita, is that you must give up the renunciation by which you renounce. See, it says that's a later stage. So there they are. Number 1, Vishaya Vasana, desire for Vishaya is senses basically. Give up the desire for the sense objects. Vishaya Vasana. Number 2, Manasa Vasana, give up the desires of your mind, but don't forget that these came from those. You see, it would be this isn't this dissolving the mind stream? Isn't this separating yourself, your Purusha from your Prakriti right here, even in the stages of renunciation? You're just doing it swift, you see. And you probably have a teacher guiding that, and you have a scripture supporting it, and you're all on board with it 100%. This lifetime, I will gain it. It'll take me 1 lifetime to do this, or 6 months, Vivekananda says. Pranaya Vashana, well, that's pretty deep. Give up social relations and cultivate knowledge alone. And I've seen some of my own students pass through this phase to a better mental perspective. And I've seen people who are caught between the two of them too, trying to renounce but having difficulty with family, social relations, and not just not just their father, mother family, but their own family, wives and husbands' family, keeping them from completing this important stage of renunciation. Because remember, Sri Ramakrishna said, monks and householders both need to renounce. I mean, this is not an option. Renunciation has to happen if you want peace of mind. What to speak of Kaivalya. As soon as you renounce a thing, Holy Mother says, you get peace. And Krishna says the same in the Gita, in 4 stages. So here, the Jivan Mukta Viveka for monastics is saying pretty much the same thing. You want to get to that place where knowledge is cultivated in an unimpeded fashion, not just by wife and husband and wealth and progeny, which could be a distraction, could be a positive help if they're dharmic, if they're taught to be dharmic, or if you take them on dharmically in each lifetime. Because band together with those who are of same mind, the worldly do that, why shouldn't the spiritual do that? So in that way then, whatever gets in the way of you seeking that highest knowledge has to go by. And that's where monastic renunciation, or a renunciation for a kind of high-seeking dharmic householder or rishi or forest dweller, let's say, because we had some of them in the early 1900s here when Vedanta and Gita came and so forth. There were the Walt Whitmans and people like that who were reading the Upanishads and withdrawing into the woods saying, oh, this is great, I remember this, you see. So in the cases of those beings, then this is a deep step inside. It's a harder step to take for most people. The first 2 should be quite easy. Of course, for people who are attached, the first one is already impossible. Give up the sense objects because they're attached to pleasure. And then the mind's desires come next. So you see how they're going with this. Vishaya, Manasa, now Pranaya. Finally, Vidya Vasana. Give up knowledge to realize truth. So the knowledge has to go to, Krishna will tell you the same in the Gita, that knowledge which doesn't reach realization can be dangerous. So you hold knowledge just as long as it takes to destroy ignorance, and then you move on quickly to use that knowledge of Dharma to get from aparavidya to paravidya. And then you dwell in that and retain that. They're speaking about that a lot on retreat last weekend up in Washington State. That to retain a thing is also very important, and people can hear it, they can snap to it, they can entertain it, and they can study it, but to retain that is what's missing. See? You have to retain it in a retentive memory. Smriti rupena samstita. You need to retain it that way. So here's how Lord Vashishtha would put it. The beginner should fill 2 parts of the mind with objects of enjoyment, 1 part by study of the scriptures and 1 part by attending upon the Guru. So here's how they're slowly weaning you off of Prakriti to realize your Purusha. The intermediate student should fill 1 part of the mind with objects, 1 part of the reflecting on the scriptures, and 2 parts by attending on the Guru. That means serving the Guru, but I think it also, more importantly, means hearing the teachings of the Guru, clarifying yourself with the teachings, and again, learning how to retain it like he or she has done. But then the advanced student should fill half of the mind with the study of the scriptures, and then the remaining half with worship of the teacher. And I just said in the first half that worship to them is going on all the time naturally. It's not like, oh, I have to go worship in order to gain this, or if I worship, I'll be good instead of bad. But it becomes what you do. You even deify objects with it, which is one of the reasons why you can renounce sense objects, because you see them alone as divinity and has, number 2, coming out of your own mind, right? So why would you mistreat them if they were your own? So in this way, Holy Mother used to say, the whole world is your own. Don't find fault with anything. This was her last message before she left the body to us. So here we have a nice blending of the Jivan Mukti Viveka teaching, right out of 3 or 4 of its slokas, followed by a teaching that complements it from the ancient mind-born son of Lord Brahma, Lord Vashishta, who was a powerful and renowned rishi. And so that's a good complement that covers all bases and all levels of practice too. It can be done, and it must be done. When are you going to do it? And have you accomplished it? Are important levels and questions. So then this quote that I put together here follows another popular line of reasoning in the Vedanta. Raising an opposite wave in the mind is called pratipaksha bhavanam. It is much overlooked and underestimated method for spiritual practice. It is a simple way of watering the flowers and not the weeds. Here, the aspirant does not strive to root out desires, to squelch emotions, or to destroy the passions, or force austerities. Instead, he slowly transforms the mind by fixing it on the Dharma and its teachings alone. So, these are some methods that people have been trying that, depending on the level of their proficiency or capacity, often don't work out. Root out desires, maybe the ascetics can do that. But if you pull out something by the roots, it leaves a space in there, and so you're going to have to fill that in somehow. So you're pulling those out of the mind forcefully, and there are some beings powerful enough to not only do it, but to survive after it's done. They have to survive long enough. The mind has to remain astute and shining like with the buddhi in order to be able to reach this higher stage of Kaivalya. So to squelch emotions, that's also better to turn emotions into devotion, as we say in Vedanta. So it's not the repression, that other watchword of psychotherapy and so forth that we're talking about there. We're talking about deifying everything and therefore getting to the root, to the mind, which would be the second state. Your own desires are causing your own problems with emotions, so you're not really going to the source of things when you try and deal with emotions the way they're doing in Western psychology. Have to go to the Eastern psychology, that's called yoga, in order to learn how to go to the source of things and dissolve them or attenuate them or neutralize them or love them away, deify them, or to destroy the passions or force austerities. Those are the 4 ways in which I'm putting it here that are put in their place when you practice watering the flowers instead of the weeds. The ancient pratipaksha bhavanam, where there is hate, malice, or love. It's even in Christianity that you have that kind of way of proceeding, that beings were able to reach their higher nature through that. So again, a quick run through a natural renunciation chart, which is very beautiful. And that was in accord with the 3rd sloka, which said, in the sphere of Brahma, at the time of cosmic dissolution, they get liberated by that renunciation, and they attain immortality. By means of faith, devotion, and meditation are the yogas that he's talking about here. This is Lord Brahma himself talking to one of his mind-born sons, Aishvalayana. So all of these Upanishads we've been finding out, all these hidden rishis that we don't know much about at all because they're so ancient, that these names appear. And we know Brahma and so forth, and we know Vashishta and a few of them. But these other rishis must have been very powerful and were of course responsible for putting out these Upanishads, like I said. renunciation. Now, I'll reread Sloka 3. Higher than heaven, seated in the cave of the heart, the booty that shines is seen by the self-controlled. They being of pure minds, having well ascertained reality by knowledge of Vedanta, through renunciation and sannyas, this chart we just took, in the sphere of Brahma at the time of cosmic dissolution, they get liberated from the highest apparent immortality of the manifested universe. So there's where we could look at another teaching of Samkhya Yoga that is very powerful. In one of our earliest charts, this is number 14 of 350. So we've taken it before. It's good to call it up again, because it comes out of that image that I found on the wall of a prison I was teaching in to try and help suffering souls. And I saw this on the window pasted, and I asked the guard if I could have a copy of that. So she made me a copy, and I brought it and found the original. And it's about this iceberg that the bulk of it's underneath the water, the tips and the top. So when I saw that, I said, well, that's just beautiful for Purusha and Prakriti, or for manifested and unmanifested Prakriti, because it helps us understand then this fifth point of the essential facts, is that nature has manifested and unmanifested sides. This will help you understand not only that what's here came from inside here, that is, objects came from thoughts. Then it'll also help you understand how to renounce these outer things, but find their source in the mind. And then, as the renunciation stages ask you to do, dissolve the desires at the source, not just at outward. People are trying external renunciation, and it's not working for them, of course. It's kind of a premature renunciation. So if you got to the source where the seeds are and burnt them, Sri Ramakrishna said, then those wouldn't sprout anymore, those desires of the mind that give rise to sense objects that you get attached to with pleasure and that make you suffer when they decay or are stolen, or you get bored with them, or whatever the case. So you always have to move towards the internal origins in Indian darshanas. Prakriti is the equilibrium of the three gunas, not evolved from any other source, being the primordial source of all other evolutes. A greater amount of Prakriti is unmanifest. Purusha, the sentient conscience principle, is wise, ever pure, and ever free. Shuddha, Buddha, Mukta, I think is the phrase that Kapila uses. So this is the ancient, old, great, hoary seer, Lord Kapila. What we have left of his scriptures are just very little, but enough to know that this is a kind of statement that comes from him, that unmanifested Prakriti gives rise to manifested Prakriti. We know nothing about that in Western ideologies. It's never mentioned. So we never know that the mind gave rise to the world because of that missing knowledge. If we had been taught that Prakriti isn't just out here, but it's inside your mind first, then there would be so much problem taken care of, so much suffering alleviated, and so much philosophical misunderstanding called Bhranti Darshana, deluded thinking, would be gone, wouldn't be there in the first place, if we knew that one simple fact that Kapila taught. That Prakriti is twofold. Otherwise, what are you doing? Say, okay, I gave up the outer world, but the spirit is inside. But the spirit is not inside. Unmanifested Prakriti is inside. The spirit is beyond outer and inner. So you fall into that Bhranti Darshana. And people will go on for that for hundreds and thousands of years thinking that way, if they didn't wake up to that certain fact. So when you account for unmanifested Prakriti, you're accounting for everything that's in your mind that produced everything that's out here. And that's not Brahman, because Brahman doesn't create. When Vivekananda came here, he had to create a new English word. No, Brahman is a create. Please don't put all that on Brahman. Put it on the mind. That's where it came from. So I've accented this teaching over 20 years or more, and I'm just coming back to it now after a lapse of not having repeated it for some 4 or 5 years. But this chart just brings it all back to me, how important it is to know that there's an unmanifested side to Prakriti, and that's the source to everything you see out here. So the source is not God. God can't be the source of anything that's created. It's a-create. There's a relationship between God, called Purusha, and what's out here. That we can give you, but you're going to have to detach and keep yourself free, or later separate from what's out here with the power invested in you, which is Atman or Purusha, in order to transcend both the inner and the outer. So Om Drishyam Pratitam Pravilapayan San Matra Manandaganam Vivavaya Antaha Sarira Antaram Va, you see, is how Shankara puts it. It says, Brahman is an indeterminable mass of pure conscious awareness, taking what's outside and what's inside, render them into one indivisible state, then meditated on that state, pass your time contentedly and be free, is what beautiful out of the Viveka Chudamani of Shankara. Bahir, outer, antaram, inner, va. Take them and make them one state, because that's what they are. So it's one Prakriti in 2 forms, manifested and unmanifested. So there you see an image that fits that. There you see the tip of the iceberg. And that's what you dissolved, right? And tried to separate yourself from. Mahat, buddhi, ahamkara, manas, tanmatra, the 5 indriyas and the elements and the vishaya, the objects that come from them, all across the top in a circle over the tip of the iceberg, you see. But underneath all that is unmanifested Prakriti. And the gunas are in or out of equilibrium when all of the tip comes up, you see. But they're in equilibrium when you go into unmanifested Prakriti. It's also called pradhana. So that's formless matter you're talking about, or seeds for everything. All worlds, all things, and objects in potential are there in the depths. And there's what I mentioned in the first half, sancharaha prati sancharaha. There is a chain of transition from unmanifested or non-evolved nature to manifested nature and its evolutes, ending in the grossest evolute called earth. There is also a reverse transition of evolutes ending in dissolution into unmanifested Prakriti. So you realize that the soul is not any of that. And when it drew it drew it back into its seeds, not into it. So it was the witness that was doing that process, like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are showing us at a cosmic level. The Mahat's doing that very thing at a very high level with very powerful seed words or thoughts. But when you're doing it yourself as an individual, like a Purusha, like from the state of Atman, you're giving rise to that dream, and then you're ending it yourself. This is a conscious projection and a conscious withdrawal. And when we get to the slokas here, 11 through 14, I have them marked off to show the chart, Atmik Sankalpa and Mayik Sankalpa. So you can see how a great soul like Lord Brahma uses projection, sustenance and withdrawal, and how people are using it too in a diluted way and falling victim to all its problems, called changes, believing in change. It's the self deluded by Maya, or ignorance, the Rishi says here. So we'll get to that, I don't know, next week maybe, but the following week for sure. It's a beautiful chart with the goddess in the middle, and it's got Atmik Sankalpa, how to do it right, and Mike Sankalpa, try not to do that at all, would be the thing. And it would follow right through to quote from the Kaivalya Upanishad here, deep, deep down at the bulk. All that is perceived by the senses is finite. All that is beyond the senses is infinite. But from the infinite, the finite has come. Yet being infinite, only infinite remains. So everything has come from within as seeds, manifesting itself out, and then turning into the finite universe. And what's inside is infinite, and even the finite is infinite. So you draw them back in, and that's how you take Bahur Antaram Va. That's how you take the two states of Prakriti, unmanifested and manifest, render them back into one, and know that you're the master of that. And that tempest of in the teapot is your doing. And even the Mahat is doing that in front of you, and you're witnessing it. They go on with their powers, while you just tend to your own liberation. Because otherwise that thou art wouldn't make any sense. They're not saying the Mahat thou art. They're saying Brahman thou art. Way, 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 way deep down and around this whole iceberg are beings like Ishvara. And there's Purusha or / Brahman, which I just said, is in the ocean of consciousness in which the iceberg itself exists. Or dive deep, O mind, dive deep into the ocean of God's beauty. If you descend to the uttermost depths, there you will find the gem of love. That's Kabir saying that. About Om, you see, about that other great, the great word, which is uttered in the deepest consciousness of mind in order to produce the higher realms, Brahmaloka, for instance. The two entrances are on the top are other. All four of these are indicative of the Purusha, right? The sentient soul. So Paramakasha, or Chiddakasha, Sri Ramakrishna used to say, is that space of awareness, in which, or the sky of awareness, which is the Tibetan Buddhists like that too. The blue sky of open awareness, they call it. There's a teaching in it in Tibetan Buddhism. So all of that is just like this ocean is just surrounding everything as the real. That's the true nature of the Purusha or the Atman, Paramatman. Or call it, if you like, the sunlight of non-dual reality. So sun, sky, ocean, you can see how these, if they're looked at as 3 of the 5 tattvas, earth, air, and so forth, then they would be tattvas with a gross manifestation, down in manifested Prakriti. Take them deeper and deeper till you've got the fire of yoga, till you've got the waters of life. The beautiful Rig Veda, sto Indram Mitram Matarato Divyaha Sasuparna Garutman Ekam Sattvi Prabhuda Vedantya Agnim Yaman Matarish Vanamahu. That's the Mahat. So basically, it's that one formless Brahman, the wise give beautiful names to. It's nameless and formless, but the wise love it so much they have to assign some sort of inspiring names to, like Indram, Mitram, Varunam, so forth, Agnim. So what they call that, the fire of yoga, not just fire. They call that the waters of life, not just water. And they call that the ether of the divine ethers, not just ether and air. And they call that the devourer of death, and they call that the carrier of consciousness, Garuda. And they call that the friend of all beings and the eternal companion, and the one who shines forth the light. Beautiful, right out of the Rig Veda. So that's how to look at the 5 elements at a very, very refined level in the cave of the heart, the buddhi. That's how to see those. And they seem inner, they seem outer here, they seem inner in your mind, but they're really transcendent. They're really found in the sky of awareness, in the sunlight of non-duality, and in the ocean of consciousness, and in the Word. That's why this is surrounding the iceberg. So this is taken out of this third sloka. When they got liberated from the highest apparent dimension and attained immortality, they got freed from the manifest universe. Freed from the manifest universe. That's Kaivalya. See? The separation has been made from everything that changes, everything that's projected, even from the highest mind. They got freed from that and realized their true nature, which is beyond birth, life, and death, and beyond all pairs of opposites. Here is a good stopping place, because I don't want to launch into even another chart. I might have a record here in 3 hours, having shown you so many of my dharmic charts, which can be found in that book, Footfalls, most of them. We'll continue on then next Sunday at the same time with slokas 4 and 5, and go on to who is this unthinkable Brahman, with endless forms, the peaceful, the immortal, the origin of the worlds, without beginning, middle, and end, the only one, who is all-pervading consciousness and bliss, formless and wonderful, Advaita. That's what we'll study next week. Namaste to all, and let's end with a chant. Om Sato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamaya Abira Mayedi Rudrayate Dakshinamukam Tenamam Pahinicham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from lower truth to higher truth. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.